What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Garage Strength Podcast, where we have world-renowned strength coach, Dr. Joel Seedman, along with King of the PA Press, Earl Kunkel. And we are here ready to dive deep and to ask you a whole bunch of different questions. So, Joel, how are you doing?
Doing good. How are you guys doing? Thanks for having me on. You said world famous. I think infamous strength coach is probably more like the right word these days.
Infamous
Yeah.
strength coach.
That's a video game too.
Maybe before we get into the infamous part, take us through like your traditional schooling, like what your background was, or where you went to university and your postgrad or your graduate degree.
Yeah, for sure. You know, I mean, we can go back as early as even when I was a teenager in high school, just reading all the Weider publications, the Joe Weider publications, Flex Magazine, Muscle and Fitness. That's kind of where I got started to get a passion early on, just training myself and then training a few my friends. And then I ended up going to Indiana University for my undergraduate degree in kinesiology. Did a few minors in sports nutrition and some other like things related to kinesiology. During that time, I was basically doing personal training and a little bit of strength and conditioning with some of the Indiana University sports teams. And then I ended up doing my master's degree in kinesiology, also at Indiana University. Continue to do personal training one-on-one while also working with athletes at the college. And that was about up until 24, 25. And it was interesting at that point because my body started to break down a little bit. And it got to the point where squatting, the way I was doing ass to grass squats or deep squats and doing kind of traditional conventional methods, it started to hurt my body. And I started to see some trends amongst some of my other clients, talking to other strength coaches about maybe some issues that they were seeing in their clientele and their athletes, maybe even related to just following the traditional methods. And so that kind of got me interested to go a little bit deeper and doing a little bit more investigation. That's kind of where I went down the road of doing my PhD at University of Georgia. And I just wanted to kind of look at things from a blank slate instead of saying, hey, here's how my strength coaches and mentors did things. Let me look at this kind of from a blank slate and see what the research says. And that's kind of where I started to get into some of the 90-degree methods and some of the eccentric isometrics and things that people see me currently doing today.
Okay, so I think that sort of segues into the infamous part of like, and I brought this up a little bit off camera, but I think there's three reasons why a typical traditional strength coach would dislike you, or they speak negatively about you. And it's like, they go through and they're like, all right, well, they see this pattern interrupt while they're scrolling on their Instagram feed of you hitting, a running back with a stability ball while you're doing trap bar deadlifts or something like this. And I think one, it's fair that they see that and they're like, well, that's stupid. Why, that this is reaching other people and people might see this and try to do that. The other two aspects that I actually think should be discussed are also, they might be jealous that you're working with super high level athletes, including probably one of the best kickers in the NFL. And then they also probably look at some of your exercises and they're like, I sort of like that movement. Like, I might want to use that. And even to the point where, I've done a video where I've trained like you for a week, and some of those exercises I've used in our programming. So I did want to bring that up. And I guess it like leads into, is there like a calculated, like, I feel like you were almost the first like Instagram influencer with strength and conditioning, and it sort of led down that way. And is that a calculated decision to make, to use those exercises so that you can get more people to embrace what you're doing long term, I guess?
Yeah. Every video I show is done first and foremost with the athlete in mind, not with like, oh, I got to do, Instagram and got to make this look good. At the end of the day, if I go through a carousel list of like, hey, here are the 9 exercises or 8 exercises I had the athlete do that day, I will usually choose the one that I know is going to help maybe garner a little bit more visibility so that we can spread the message more. So if we did, 8 exercises, I'm going to choose, I mean, who wouldn't choose the most eye-catching first exercise for that particular workout to post. I mean, it's just, unless you don't want people to see your stuff.
If
So
you're a bad business person, you would not do that.
exactly. So, but every exercise that we do is for a specific reason. I mean, we can just go to probably the one you just pointed out, the neck or head perturbation exercise, where Chris Carson, the running back. He's doing trap bar deadlifts with a 90-degree centric isometric hold. I'm taking a stability ball and popping them in the head. Okay. And I even put in that post, this is probably something that most people don't need to do, but for contact or impact athletes, particularly one who had a neck injury, which was Chris. And the goal during that phase was he was trying to get he had neck surgery. There's a whole extensive list of things that happened here. But the injury technically happened before we ever started training together. And he wasn't aware of it because, and I don't want to get too detailed here because there's some privacy issues, but um, let's just say it should have been diagnosed before he came here. There were some things that got missed, but anyways, so he was trying to get back to the point where he felt confident taking hits on the field. And before an athlete takes hits on the field, we want to make sure, hey, their neck is strong enough in here. They can not only stabilize their neck, they not only have a strong neck to be able to, impact or handle impact, but they also have to be able to react to impact, unpredictable impact, particularly for a running back. So for him, he actually said after that exercise, this was like, ooh, this is good because I actually feel a bit more confident and comfortable that I can take impact in a somewhat uncontrolled setting where I don't know where it's coming from because I was giving him impact in a somewhat unpredictable scenario. And that's the nature of perturbation training in general. There's a lot of research showing that perturbation training is really good, not just for stability, but for creating that muscle stiffness. And muscle stiffness is actually really important for co-contraction. And co-contraction is ultimately how we stabilize a joint and prevent injury. So,
Okay, so you had mentioned something in there about in that phase with Chris and his training, and one thing I wanted to go into too was I sort of wanted to dive into, a kid walks in the door, or Chris walks in the door, or a world like NFL athlete walks in the door. Can you walk us through, like you had mentioned, that phase? So I almost wanted to say if we could say, like, do you have like a phase construct for for periodization, or do you believe in periodization, and go through what those phases theoretically could be, and then walk into from there almost like a split within a week and then within a session?
let me give you the quick answer there. I actually don't believe in periodization. I don't use periodization anymore. And we can go a bit more into that. But yeah, I guess really the reason I don't believe in periodization is because I used to use a somewhat kind of undulating periodization model, not as much of a linear one. I used to use that more back in the day when I used traditional training methods. What I found is that the more effective the reps are, the more therapeutic the reps are, the less we have to periodize it and the less we have to ration it. We can actually use it quite a bit more consistently and quite a bit more frequently, because even if it's heavy, because a muscular contraction and strength training, when it's done right, and in my opinion and from what I've seen, even if it's heavy loads, it's very therapeutic on the body. So in my mind, it's like, okay, well, why do we have to ration these exercises or ration these movement patterns? Now, with that said, you don't want to be doing the same exact exercise every single day and just overloading the exact same movement pattern. We're smart with it. But generally speaking, I can just kind of walk you through what our programming looks like for most athletes. It's generally 3 times per week, and it's typically 3 full body workouts. We might emphasize legs a little bit more in one workout. We might emphasize explosive power a bit more in one workout. We might emphasize upper body more in one day. But one of the reasons why I'm not a huge fan of periodization and kind of getting too caught up in program planning is because physiology is very tough to predict from day to day. I mean, even honestly, from hour to hour, depending on what the person is going through. So sometimes we'll have an athlete come in, and in my mind, and even with him what he's maybe had going on with his current week of practice and skills work. He may be thinking, hey, I'm feeling a little bit tired today, but let's just see how we feel. All of a sudden we get in the middle of the workout. It's like, man, you're looking strong. Everything's locked in. He's like, yeah, I actually feel really good. So on a day that typically we might have planned to, let's go a little bit lighter, let's deload. If he's feeling good, his body's locked in, he's feeling fresh, strong, and recovered, and he actually feels like his numbers are, for whatever reason, stronger than usual that day, I want to take advantage of that. So we're going to go a little bit heavier that day. We might push the numbers. And then in contrast to that, you may have an athlete come in who you planned, hey, they're in their, recovery phase, or they're in the off season. They should be, really recovered, real strong. And for whatever reason, maybe they didn't get a good night's sleep, or maybe they're stressed. And you just see as they start doing their warm-up sets, hey, they're just not as locked in today. We might have them reduce the intensity, and we might deload them on that particular day. So I'm not saying that we always go at max intensity or that we never deload. It's just that we do it a little bit more instinctively, and as we see what the athlete needs on that particular day, and then we kind of plan around it accordingly, rather than trying to predict what their muscle physiology might look like, say, in 3 weeks from now.
Sounds like autoregulation, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's an autoregulatory form of periodization, really. Exactly.
So it's more so like intuition based. They're coming in and even you're not, you have a phase in mind in the sense that, okay, it's their off season. They just got out of football. Let's just say we have an NFL guy. Is there a formal phase written down in a document? Not really. It's still top of mind. Like, okay, I'm not going to have this guy maxing out, like, I don't, whatever exercise that might be. And then you, I guess to clarify too, you will say within a week, it might be everything's full body, but one might be like leaning towards more explosive power. One might be leaning towards more like leg strength, and one might be leaning towards more upper body base, but you're still going to be doing a full body clip each time you're training.
Yeah, exactly. And even the periodization thing, even in and of itself, it's one of the things I've always been a fan of, is that as long as the person can keep proper form and it's not breaking down, we can push the workout pretty intensely. Now, if it's 2 days or 1 day before they have some type of game or competition, no matter what, I don't care if they're feeling real strong today. We're not gonna push the numbers. There's no reason for that, because it's going to make their performance suffer. But even if it's a day where they're a little bit fatigued, I have to kind of take in mind, okay, maybe they've done 400 pounds on a squat before, but for whatever reason today they're a little bit more fatigued. Maybe they're just, their legs are a little bit tired. We can still push the intensity, relatively speaking, and say, hey, 325 looks like kind of the max weight you can handle today with perfect form. So we're still going intense, but we just might be able to kind of visually assess the scenario and say, hey, on this particular day, you're not going to be able to go as heavy, but I still want to push the intensity, so we still create a good adaptation response. And then, contrast that. If the athlete's feeling strong, we go up to 405. It's like, wow, that was easy for you. That was your third set. Let's get a bonus set in. Let's try, 425. If they agree that, hey, yeah, I want to try it because it feels real locked in, and I know I can maybe hit a little bit heavier and maybe hit a little bit of a PR, but within reason. Again, we're not trying to turn these guys into power lifters. If they hit, new numbers and new maxes without forcing it, that's fantastic. But the goal is to never, hey, we got to get you stronger at all costs. The goal is to keep them healthy and to make sure they're performing well. And if increased strength can help and assist with that, which it typically does, and that's also what we're looking for.
Do you have then okay, so with those, let's say those three training sessions, and those three sort of maybe priorities discussed, do you have, in that sense, like if you would say, okay, a full body power workout or a leg strength workout or upper body, whatever, do you have sort of like pillar exercises that would be like mainstays for each of those? Like, let's say, for in my example, and you probably have related to this in your past training. In my example, if I'm doing a strengthening workout, I'd have them back squat. I'd have them possibly clean. If we're doing like speed work, I might do sled sprints or something like that. And I sort of have a like this carryover of like, okay, these are like the 3 to 4 pillar exercises for each characteristic we're looking at. Do you have that in your system?
Yeah, no, for sure. I think, I guess you would say my main two squats would be barbell squat. Uh, it used to be a goblet squat, but unfortunately, a lot of my athletes max that out pretty quickly, and our dumbbells only go up to 120. So we'll do like a front curl dumbbell squat, one in each hand, where you're basically holding it at the top position, kind of like a front rack. Zerker squats, trap bar, eccentric isometric, which is basically like a squat position, but with a trap bar in your hands, a little bit of a narrower stance. I think I already said Zerker squat, and then some type of single leg or kickstand squat, maybe like a kickstand barbell squat, and then single leg goblet squat. So those are probably our main ones. We probably use those 75-80% of the time that we do some type of squat. The other 20% we'll throw in things like the hanging band squat, an offset squat, maybe an eyes closed squat, maybe an offset elevation squat with one foot elevated on a step or on a bumper plate and the other foot on the floor. So it's just it's a combination, but about 80% of the time it's going to be that for most of our athletes. And then, go ahead.
Because I know what Earl is going to ask you a question that I know he's going to ask, but I got to cut him off quickly. Okay, all those exercises, especially leg based, that's awesome. When are you going to write that? Like, if you don't have a periodized phase laid out, when would you write that workout? Like, how far in advance would you write a workout for an athlete, or is it literally on the fly in the moment?
It's the day before.
Okay.
Or right after their previous workout. Because, for example, if we see, hey, they just crushed a barbell back squat, they nailed it, they looked really good, then then I might not have them do like a heavy bilateral squat again. So
Okay.
that's what we might do, like a kickstand squat. We know we already loaded their spine. We know we already got that good bilateral position in. Let's emphasize a little bit more unilateral positions. Or I might say, hey, we just did a barbell squat. You look pretty good, look pretty strong, but you tended to shift a little bit today to one side. Next workout, guess what we're doing? We're doing a single leg goblet squat. So it's pretty simple. Or, we might do the single leg goblet squats and be like, wow, you look pretty symmetrical on both sides. You're looking pretty strong. Let's go barbell back squat next time. There's really, in my opinion, no such thing as the best or perfect exercise for a particular day. But there is what I would consider optimal or best technique for an exercise or a movement pattern for any given workout. And that's one of the things I get to. And that's another reason why I'm not a huge advocate of periodization. It's not even so much that I'm against it. I just think that it's a little bit unnecessary, because there is no such thing as like, oh, this is the perfect plan. This is the perfect program. This is the exact protocol they need. But in contrast to that, I would argue that there is such a thing as perfect technique or near perfect technique, or an ideal way that we want to execute the form. And that takes massive priority over, hey, this is the exact workout we got to do, the reps, the sets, the rest period, all that, which is fine. But again, it's tough to even predict that.
I'm thinking about it as like on-demand type of training,
Yeah, that's a
periodization type of thing.
great way of putting it.
Like go on YouTube, I want to watch this, gives me what I want. It's like, hey, I go in, what are my needs at this time here? On-demand training for you, auto-regulated.
I think bodybuilders are generally, not always, but bodybuilders and even powerlifters to some extent have been pretty good at that in the past. They don't always do what's in the plan. They might, say, hey, wow, this exercise feels really good today, or this exercise doesn't feel great, or man, I feel like I need to emphasize this area a little bit more. I mean, so I think
I'm a big fan on the real-time pivots you talk about too, around sort of the visual acuity of
Yeah.
what the athlete's doing. And in the past, you didn't get a documentation of it. It was just like what I saw. Where modern day, it's like I have a video of this. Like I can clearly show you. Here's my evidence for why I made this decision to go down this route. The apps will sit there and look at it with the biomechanist type of thing too, as well. So like, there's a lot of things developing that seems like allow for more of this stuff to take place too, with like the recent things in there. I do want to ask you, I I thought of it as unparalleled elevation, but I heard you use the word offset stances.
Mhm.
I'm super curious about this, like sort of what's the thought process and like your theoretical mindset for doing that. I I have ideas of it, but I want to hear it from you just because it's a little fascinating to me too, like in a cool way.
Yeah. Yeah, the offset elevation, that one to me is actually I keep that one fairly simple. Basically, it wants to pull your hips and body out of alignment and make you asymmetrical. And I always tell athletes, try to stay as symmetrical as possible. Try to avoid having it pull you out of excessive alignment and don't let it tilt your body. Pretty simple. So, and then we do 3 to 5 reps on both sides. Both sides get exposed to that during a real life scenario with sports. Typically, forces are not coming into the body perfectly symmetrical, so you could argue that it has pretty good carryover. But it's also another good way that I found that, let's say I want to work on squat technique, but I want to reduce the load a little bit, but still make the workout intense and keep the athlete's interest. Well, it's like, okay, here's a novel stimulus, not too novel because they're still putting a bar on their back. It's, still a pretty steady surface. But now we just have to use a little bit more cognitive focus and a little bit more attention to detail and understand, hey, I got to think about my form a little bit. This is a slightly different stimulus, and I have to focus on staying as symmetrical as possible. As a result, the athlete will probably slow their reps down a little bit more. They'll probably be a little bit more mentally engaged. And they'll also likely feel not as uh, compelled to have to go heavy because it's a squat that they're not as used to. They're not comparing that squat number to, oh, I barbell squatted 500 10 days ago. If I don't beat that number, I'm getting weaker. It's like, no, no, no. Think of this as a totally different squat, even though it's similar. 315, we can stay there and just focus on technique. In their mind, hey, that's great. I'm not, getting weaker. I'm not reducing the weight from what I would typically do, if that makes sense. So it's close enough to a barbell back squat where it has great transfer, but it's also giving them a slightly novel stimulus.
No, so what I'm hearing, and you can correct me if I'm wrong too, you're looking for a neurological adaptation more out of that movement with how they
100%.
align their body. All right, cool.
100%. And that's a lot of the rationale for some of the unique movements. People will often say, oh, you can't go as heavy if you do this exercise. You can't handle as much load. It's like there's so much more to lifting, especially for athletes, than just what's the heaviest they can go. There's so much more. There's so much more involved with neural adaptations, alignment, stability, reactive stabilization. I mean, there's just the list goes on and on. So I think the whole, oh, they got to get more weight on the bar if they're not lifting as much. To me, it's such an antiquated, outdated approach. And there's nothing wrong with getting stronger, but I think that's only a portion of the training.
Yeah, you made me think of when I do my yoga practice, to Dane's dismay, some of the times like I can feel my hips in certain positions aren't as aligned, and it's like, all right, so it's like kind of what I'm hearing from you is you take like that idea of stability in these like positions and saying, hey, let's get the brain and the neurological system to function and make it happen, which is pretty neat.
Absolutely. And that honestly ties into kind of the whole um, 90-degree centric isometric thing, which I'm sure you guys want to talk about a little bit at some point here. But that's kind of the whole rationale for why I train people with the whole slow and controlled 90-degree principles so that we can optimize kind of that neural feedback and sensory feedback and really tune into the nervous system and make those, subtle adjustments.
I wanted to go back to the pillar exercises. I'm sort of hung up on this, sorry. Could you give us like three, like I think you did a really good job with when I asked about the leg, like, okay, Zercher squat.
You want the upper body.
Yeah, I wanted like the upper body and the power day. Like, what would be like 2 to 5 exercises for each of those that are like, all right, 75 to 80% of the time, we're gonna do that.
Yeah. Okay. So for upper body, I would say for like chest presses, we're going to do probably like a flat bench, flat barbell bench, incline barbell bench, flat dumbbell, incline dumbbell. And now a lot of those we will go with a head off position or T bench position, which you've probably seen me post a little bit. That's just to reinforce posture alignment and hip drive and to allow that cervical spine to elongate a little bit more. We'll also throw in like a single arm chest press, a decent amount as well, just to kind of work on that anti-rotation and to have a little bit more transfer maybe for kind of that, if like a running back, they're rarely pushing with two hands against someone. They're carrying the ball and pushing with one arm. So we'll throw those in. And then maybe for explosive, we do always some type of like either a barbell jump squat, a trap bar jump squat, or like a goblet jump squat. We'll also do lunge jumps. We'll do a lot of dumbbell Olympic lifts as well. Now, here's the cool thing is that we usually take those explosive exercises and we make those fit at least 2 categories. And what I mean by that is, with these athletes, we have limited resources in terms of how much time they have and how much they can come in and train. Oftentimes you get an athlete for 2 to 3 hours a week. So if I have too many categories of exercises that I have to check off, it becomes unrealistic. So if I say, okay, let's do an exercise that might target multiple categories that an athlete needs, that's still going to be effective, but is also saving some time. Now this would be for a more advanced athlete, but we can do something like a single leg goblet squat jump while sticking the landing. So now we're working on several things. We're working on their squat pattern. We just nailed that. We knocked out their squat pattern. We also got to work on foot and ankle stabilization, which is something I try to address each and every workout for every athlete because I'm a big believer in foot mechanics. But we also got to work on explosive power and impact training. So now we just checked off 3 or 4 boxes with one simple exercise, an exercise that's very effective. And if they're advanced enough and they can do it well, then we're also hitting some other biomotor qualities there that, the athlete needs anyways. And instead of, using 3 different exercises to do that, we might only spend 5 minutes allocated to that exercise for the workout. That leaves us another 50, 55 minutes to do other exercises.
That makes sense. I think that makes sense with the.
Yeah.
I do want to go back
sort
to
of like similar with the impulse and speed.
Yeah.
To hit
Yeah, the exact same thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
When you're doing the offsets that Earl brought up, offset elevation, which I will say some of your branding terms you do a really good job with, Joel. I have to give you that credit where you do a good job. Also the fact that you brought up the 90-degree eccentric isometric. This goes back to sort of what we talked about in the beginning, where it's like, I think the problem is people get so mad just off the fact that that's your term, like that is your brand, right? And anyway, going back to the original question, how do you establish which leg you would do first on an offset elevation movement pattern?
Interesting. So usually what I'll do is I'll let the athlete decide first what they want to do, and whatever they decided on, I'll make them start on the opposite side because they obviously favor the side they wanted to start with. So we'll just switch it.
Okay.
And then what we'll do is there is something called the double offset effect. So if I have an athlete that's favoring their left leg, okay, their left leg on the floor with their right leg elevated is probably going to feel a little bit more normal. It's probably going to feel stronger. They'll likely gravitate towards that. I'm going to make them start on the other side first. However, with offset training, whatever side you do second, okay, is always going to be harder because your nervous system has to recalibrate towards the opposite direction. The easiest way to describe this is if I'm doing offset loading. Let's say I put a 25-pound plate on one side. Let's say I put it on my left side, okay? Then I got to do the other side. Let's say my right side, which is my weaker side, okay? Well, if I go 25 pounds just back to a normal squat, that is now a 25 pounds offset from what they're used to. But if I go 25 pounds in the opposite direction to the right, that's now a 50-pound offset differential. Their nervous system has to recalibrate towards. Second side is always exponentially harder. I literally will tell athletes like, hey, the second side is going to be harder. There's nothing I can say to you right now that will prepare you for how odd this second side is going to feel. They're like, okay, whatever. And they pick it up like, whoa. They will literally feel like they're almost going to lose their balance until it takes about 3 or 4 seconds for them to recalibrate towards that. Anyways, it's called what I refer to as the double offset effect. I want both sides of the body to get a similar dose of that. So we'll make sure that when we come back through in a cycle of exercise, if we do like a squat, maybe a chest and a row, well, the next set that we do on the squat, instead of starting with their left side, we'll start with the right side.
So you would do that in a workout though? You would go like a squat, and then you would go do a chest exercise, then you would do a row exercise, and then you would go back to squat?
100%.
Okay. And that's how,
Yep.
like, if we were inside of your training in a day, would they do, like, how many exercises would you do in a row before you go back to the original one?
At least 2 or 3. I'll never do just one exercise, and I can explain a little bit more of that in just a second. But usually up to like 2, maybe 5, but it's usually going to be like 3 bigger movements, and then if there are maybe 1 or 2 more, it might be something like a glute bridge just to fire up the glutes and hamstrings a little bit more. For example, if we see that maybe that area is lagging, maybe we'll throw in like a core stabilization exercise, possibly right after a squat, just to maybe decompress the spine a little bit. So yeah. But yeah, we never just do one single exercise, rest, and then come right back to that exercise.
Okay. You'd mentioned some numbers earlier. Do you have, relative to, let's say, these 3 to 5 exercises that are sort of like the key pillars, or whatever we would call them, for each characteristic that you're sort of working towards in a general sense? Do you have any like benchmark numbers that you're like, okay, if we have a running back, or if we have a kicker, or if we have a golfer, they only need to get so strong on these specific lifts? Do you have numbers like that, or like sort of benchmarks for them to work towards, or is it more just not really, I guess?
No, it's pretty much per individual. Honestly, I just judge each person by what they're by what they're used to, and by what they can handle, and by their own progression and their own improvement. I've had running backs who struggle with 365 on squats, maybe because of their limb length, or maybe because barbell back squats, for whatever reason, just don't feel as natural to them. But they're still animals on the field. They're still super explosive. And I've had other running backs who you can tell they need to actually get 500 pounds in the bar to get an adequate training stimulus. So it just, it varies a little bit.
I really want to know more about what you were talking about. You called it offset loading. I had it written down as asymmetrical loading.
Mhm.
And how you were talking about the double effect. Are those exercises designed more around stability, or are they designed more around like specific adaptations you're looking for within a joint, or like depending on where it's loaded from an offset position, versus like I'm holding a trap bar that's offset versus I have a barbell on my back that's offset?
Yeah. So first off, one of the things that I've been saying for a long time, and I couldn't necessarily prove it, but I had a pretty good inclination that, just from seeing with my athletes, that things like offset training, things like unstable training, yeah, they're great for stability. They're great for motor control. They're great for teaching athletes, how to dial in their form. But I've also seen some really good strength gains, like actually seeing improvements in their numbers from doing exercises like that. There was some new research that came out on offset training, on an offset bench press protocol, and it was pretty cool to see. What they found was that actually they compared offset barbell bench press to traditional barbell bench press, and actually the group that did barbell offset bench press got greater strength gains and greater muscle growth in their chest than the traditional group. So it's interesting because people, you always have this rationale, oh, you can't handle as much weight and therefore you won't be able to grow as much muscle with all these crazy exercises. Like, actually, your body doesn't know what the load is. It only knows tension. It only knows motor unit recruitment. It only knows intramuscular tension. It only knows mechanical tension. And if you can take a weight and make your nervous system work so hard that it's forced to recruit maybe higher threshold motor units than it would normally have to, simply because maybe you're stabilizing more, or have to stay tighter, or you have to slow the movement down, or you have to calibrate both sides because it's offset. Well, guess what? This study just confirmed what I've been saying for a long time, is that stability exercises are great for stability and control, but they do have good value also in terms of eliciting a hypertrophy and strength stimulus. So that's why when I do say something like an offset bench press during a workout, which is something maybe we only hit once every 4 to 6 weeks, that's their bench press for that workout. That's not, oh, that we'll do this in addition to another bench press. That's their bench press for that workout, because it is providing enough of a stimulus for hypertrophy and growth besides the other benefits.
My follow-up question, the ratios you use for the offsetting of the loads, like, what's the range and how do you determine that? So, like, is it 10 pounds more on one side? Is it 90 pounds more on one side? Like, how do you decide how to load it from there?
So I just call it extreme offset versus like traditional offset. Keep in mind too, offset training was developed way before I ever came into the fitness industry. So a lot of people will say, hey, why are you coming up with these crazy methods? I didn't come up with offset training. It's been around for a long time. Maybe I helped popularize it a little bit, but traditionally offset training was done where you would maybe put, 225 in a barbell squat, and then you might throw a 25 on one side. That's been done for a long time. I've seen other people do that. That's kind of more the traditional version. It's not quite as taxing neuromuscularly. However, from a lower body standpoint, you might be getting a little bit more overload than you would get with a more extreme offset variation. An extreme offset would be, hey, we're going to go empty bar and we're going to put a 45-pound plate on one side. Now, that particular version, I can guarantee you, if they did a research study on, your leg growth would not be nearly as good as, say, doing a 405-pound barbell squat, just because your core and your trunk are working so aggressively. I can tell you right now that the amount of core activation on a squat like that is through the roof. It's one of the hardest exercises you can do. Now, will they get a lot of leg development from that exercise right then and there? No. But if we contrast that next workout, we go back to a traditional barbell squat, guess what? The athlete just got better at creating really high tension and motor unit recruitment. Now they can actually probably go a little bit heavier. So in answer to your question, we'll do a combination. We'll do the extreme offset loading. And for somebody like maybe like a beginner, which honestly, I'm not even going to use offset too much for beginners, but maybe they've been training for 4 to 6 months, we might put 10 to 15 pounds on one side of the bar and nothing on the other. If it's a really strong athlete, one of my running backs, Keith Smith, this guy's a beast. He was doing bent over barbell rows the other day, I think with 55 pounds on one side and nothing on the other, and he was able to keep his form perfect. I was like, man, that's ridiculous. I've never seen anybody be able to do that. The amount of core strength for that, and just full body strength and even body awareness to be able to keep the bar squared and to keep both sides of his body and bar synchronized. Insane. So we'll do a combination. But yeah, those are kind of the two main versions. One would be, hey, we're going to go kind of 70% of their traditional load, maybe put an extra 5 or 10% on one side. The other would be, hey, we're going to go empty bar and we're just going to load up one side with as much as they can handle while keeping their form locked in and without showing signs of asymmetrical loading.
With the offset, are you going, let's say you do a barbell squat, right side is loaded, left side's empty. Would you go, maybe that's a bad example, single leg, let's go single leg squat, like almost like a split squat, right side's loaded, left side's empty, right side's forward. Would you just stay with the load on the right and then just switch their feet? Or would you have the athlete turn? Like, how do you play that game?
Yeah, you can do both. Lunges get a little bit tricky because now you have 4 combinations of what's possible. You have ipsilateral loading on your right, you have contralateral loading on your right, and then you got to deal with the same issue on the left. So typically, If the athlete is more prone to valgus issues, which I would argue more athletes than not are, I would say probably 80% of the athletes we see or more tend to have valgus ankle and knee collapse, then we're going to go contralateral loading. So we're going to load the right side of the bar and we'll have their left leg in front so that it's wanting to pull their left knee inward and their left ankle inward, and they have to resist that by pushing out. And if they don't have an imbalance, they're pretty symmetrical, then we'll do maybe 2 or 3 reps on their left leg in front, and then we'll keep the same barbell position, and then we'll put the right leg in front, and then we'll put it down, then we'll face the other direction and do the same thing. So we get both sides. We get the ipsilateral and contralateral. But it depends on, again, what the particular weakness is for the athlete.
Okay. I think I wanted to ask about like the creative process, and I was going to try and link this into you explaining like the 90-degree eccentric isometric. But like I feel like we're pretty good at like sort of making exercises. Like
Yeah, you made up 3 yesterday when we were trying.
so like I have I can relate to what you've done. What, you know, Earl's also a musician and an artist. You got a nice drawing there, Earl. I gotta say that.
All it is circles.
I really like it.
I guess I should put it up there real quick.
But
there.
I wanted to bring that up where it's like I want you to walk us through your creative processing of basically creating a movement pattern, and like what does that entail? Is it a solution that you're looking for from a problem you see in movement patterns? Like walk us through that creative thought process if you have a consistent theme of like how you do that, and then maybe lead into the explaining in detail, like as thoroughly as possible. This is, as well as, you know, somebody who's like, what the heck would 90 eccentric isometric be like, you know, off the street? Let's hear it from the infamous, learn. So
yeah, okay. So just generally speaking, when I'm coming up with a new exercise, if I can't have a rationale for what it's doing to create a certain adaptation response, then it's just a new exercise, and it's a novel exercise for the sake of being a novel and new exercise, and that to me is kind of useless, and I'm not going to really use it that much.
Okay.
Maybe to have a little fun in my own training session, and maybe to see if I can discover anything unique about it that might have a good transfer for other athletes. But generally speaking, and I wouldn't say generally speaking, pretty much 100% of the time, when I come up with a new exercise or I have a unique exercise protocol that I've used that maybe people aren't as used to seeing, the reason we do it is to get the athlete's form and technique more locked in and to force them to be more specific and technical with their technique. It's that simple. It always comes back to that. When I have athletes do hanging band, I love hanging band because guess what? They have to go slow. They have no choice. They have to stay tight. If they go past 90 degrees, which we'll talk about in a little bit, or they significantly collapse, they're going to destabilize their joints. So it's just, you start reinforcing all the cues that you've given to the athlete. They start to see, this makes sense why you've given me these cues now about locking my feet down, keeping good posture, keeping my core tight, pulling my shoulders down and back, because they see when they do some of those unstable variations, if they don't adhere to those cues, guess what? The exercise becomes almost uncontrollable and they can't lock it in. So exercises that involve high levels of motor control and stability, they force you to have to use better technique than if you're just doing traditional variations. Excuse me. And then when you go back to traditional variations, you're more likely to be that much more locked in, and then you can handle heavier weight more naturally without it being a strain, because you've just spent so much cognitive effort to dial it in with a variation that required a lot more focus and attention capacity. So it always, it always goes back to it has to improve their general movement patterns for the most basic exercises. Like every squat we do, if it doesn't improve a standard barbell back squat or standard even bodyweight squat, then it's useless. It should always improve the foundational movement pattern for whatever we're doing.
So that's where you go back and you're like, okay, like those pillar exercises might be a dumbbell O lift or a trap bar jump or like a barbell back squat, and if the offset or if the hanging hasn't impacted that for an extended period of time, you would, let's say if that didn't happen, you would have thrown those out the window and said these aren't working for those foundational movements.
100%. And when I see a lot of like rapid dynamic movements a lot in the industry now. They look really cool. Um, and they're just really quick and like fast twitch and just kind of like chaotic and all over the place. I'm not ripping on those, but when I've seen people do those, and if I've ever even tried to use those with athletes, it doesn't really do anything. It doesn't have any impact on those other movement patterns in terms of improving them. All it's doing is kind of demonstrating your pre-existing levels of like quick twitch activation. So, and it's like, is that really promoting a response just because you can move it fast and you can do it
Are you
quickly?
saying, can you clarify, like, I mean, I had, when you described this, in my mind, I had someone sitting on a box and kicking a stability ball, and they're
100%.
doing like, okay, that's
Great
that's
example. Great
yeah.
example. It's like, okay, they're doing it fast, but just
Mhm.
because you're doing it fast doesn't mean it's making you faster. It's a big difference between demonstrating strength and power and building strength and power. And it to me, it has to be very meticulously done. It can't be sloppy. And movements that are just happening quick, 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 they get so sloppy you can't fine tune anything. And if your form starts breaking down and you divert back to old compensation patterns, you're not getting better, you're getting worse. And let's face it, every athlete has compensation patterns. Every athlete has imbalances. If you're doing too much of that quick twitch, rapid movement, just rep after rep after rep after rep, where they can't even self-assess if their technique's locked in, and the coach can't even assess because it's happening so quickly. Like, what are you really doing besides potentially breaking their form down more? So even when we do explosive exercises like jumps, we usually follow with a controlled eccentric, getting that pause, basically a 90-degree eccentric isometric, so they can lock the form in, make sure their eccentric is loaded properly. If that's loaded properly, then they follow that with a jump. But we're not just going to, hey, we'll go do 5 quick, fast jumps. It's like we can do that, but that's probably not making them much better.
So that's where you would bring up the 90-degree eccentric isometric is, using that example, they go down to 90 degrees, and how do you define 90 degrees?
Yep, 90 degrees is always about joint angles. When we look at the field of biomechanics, which is basically, study of joint angles and arthrokinematics, osteokinematics, just kinematic joint angles, it's always done by looking at the joint angles themselves, not the joints relative to another surface like the floor. So thighs being parallel to the floor does not mean it's a 90-degree squat. That is a complete myth and misconception, is not based on any science. A squat with a 90-degree joint angle where we have tibial inclination as well as torso inclination, which is how every single human jumps or squats. It's impossible to jump or squat, except if it's a wall squat. It's impossible to do a squat any other way without inclination of the torso and tibia. As a result, your 90-degree joint angle is going to be significantly above parallel. And it's actually going to be a 90-degree joint angle at the hip joint and at the knee joint. And so visually, the visual component when you're assessing these can kind of mess with you at first. When you see it, you kind of have to, like, almost, if you're looking at it on a screen, you have to tilt it. You eventually get good at seeing that. But if you understand what I'm saying. A parallel squat is about 120 degrees of knee flexion. A 90-degree squat is usually 30 degrees above parallel, generally speaking.
In your sense, if you're breaking down a movement pattern, you would be looking essentially at the knee in relation to the hip and their torso, almost like impacted directly, instead of like in the sense of looking at, okay, well, the thigh is parallel to the floor.
Right. Right.
Okay. Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah,
That
and you're
really,
just gonna track forward
yeah,
to create
yeah.
that
I mean, it really,
imbalance.
like, the thigh being parallel to the floor, or or relative to any other joint surface, or it's like that really has no bearing on our force vectors in terms of what we're trying to optimize. It's just not how biomechanics work. And even with the squat, if you take a really wide stance, well, your parallel position might actually be closer to like 100, maybe 110 degrees of knee flexion. Whereas if you have a very narrow stance where your knees are going to travel forward more naturally, it might be closer to like 130 degrees of knee flexion to finally get to parallel. So it's like those things don't matter. What matters is, are you hitting those 90-degree positions? Because when we have athletes do athletic skills, whether that's jumping, pushing someone, hitting, throwing, kicking, generally they're done with 90-degree joint angles. Not always, but we want to be pretty much as close to those as possible, even though the athlete might end up in somewhat unpredictable positions periodically. As long as their body's healthy, they'll be able to handle that. But generally speaking, 90-degree positions have been analyzed by biomechanists for years, for centuries or decades, and it's general consensus that most positions in sports, the 90-degree position or as close to that as possible is ideal biomechanically.
Do you have like a specific biomechanist that you sort of refer to consistently for this research?
No, I took some courses with like Jesus DePena, Kathy Simpson. I mean, they had a big influence on me when I was, But as far as ones that I always go back to, or hey, this is the research. I mean, I don't even. It's pretty much the whole body of literature of biomechanics that I always go back to, rather than just one particular, uh, you know, biomechanist or scientist.
So, and then with that 90-degree eccentric isometric, that would be same thing, controlled with if we're talking about the upper body. Sorry, I didn't clarify. Controlled position until you get how do you gauge 90 degrees in the if we're using the shoulder with the elbow, relative to the torso, how would you gauge that?
Yeah, it's just the elbow joint at that point. Yeah. And again, one of the things that because people are always asking, it's like, well, how do you like? Why do you always make people? I often get asked, why do I make people squat to 90 degrees, or why do I make this person use 90 degrees? I'm not making people do anything. I don't have to force this. This is where it gets kind of interesting because, and this is where the nervous system comes in. Oftentimes I'll have a group of 15, 20 athletes. Sometimes 3 or 4 of those will be new athletes. I don't have the resources in me to be able to sit with each athlete, get the goniometer out, be like, no, you got to go an inch deeper. Oh, you went a half inch too far. Come back. I don't. That's not what we do. What we do is we say, hey, lock your feet in. Well, I take a step back. Lock your posture in. Stay as tight as possible. The perfect posture involves keeping a tall, retracted head position, shoulders down and back. Keep your core tight and braced with your stomach pulled in. Lock your feet in perfectly straight with your big toes screwed into the ground while you're popping your arches up. Now, go ahead and do any movement with those elements involved. And guess what? This is where it's so cool, because I can take any new athlete and the same thing happens repeatedly, time and time and again. They inevitably go to 90-degree joint angles, because to go significantly past that, they have to sacrifice those elements we just discussed. And the human body is really good at finding 90-degree positions. It gravitates towards those given the optimal opportunity, which the posture and the feet and the core, that provides that opportunity. And then if we think about it, when they've done assessments of athletes doing jumps, they found that athletes jump from 90-degree positions almost inevitably every time for every athlete. Okay. You don't have to tell someone, hey, go ahead and do a vertical jump for me. But before you go and jump up, make sure you hit 90 degrees at your hips and knees and then jump. Like, no, you don't have to tell an athlete that. Their body, the human body, is really good at instinctively finding those optimal, natural 90-degree positions, because not only do we produce and absorb the most force, but it's the optimal position for anatomical leverage, for biomechanics, for length tension relationship of the muscles. It's where we create the most co-contraction. It's where we have the most muscle stiffness, which is key for muscle spindle function. And muscle spindles is how we have our sense of feel. And that's why when we do the 90-degree thing here, we lock the posture in and we go slow. The athlete can literally feel where their natural stopping point is. I'll take a video of that and I'll say, okay, how did that squat feel? I'll say, good. That's about as far as I could go without losing the form that you told me to in terms of my feet, my posture. I show them the video. They're like, whoa, that's like exactly the 90-degree squat you showed me. And I'll even draw it on it. That's 90. And it blows their mind. And to be honest, it kind of still blows my mind to this day, Because like, wait a minute, I just worked with this athlete for like 1 minute and I could get them into a perfect 90-degree squat without having to even tell them where to stop. It's because the body naturally finds those positions when everything's locked in and when you eliminate those compensation patterns. And a lot of that stems from not having the posture, the feet, and the core locked in. So I know it's a little bit more detail. I can't even remember what the
Well, it does stem into when you mention about setting the body there. What are you saying? Like, what are you cueing in the gut here when someone's like, let's just theoretically say they're gonna back squat.
yeah.
They're gonna go back squat 90, eccentric, isometric, come back up. What are you cueing them on the gut? Like, are they filling up with air? Are they blowing out air? Are they sucking in their stomach? Are they pushing their stomach out?
Yeah. Just stomach in, keep it braced. Simple. I try to keep it as simple as possible. I used to have like way more details I would go into with athletes in terms of how to cue these things. Now, every once in a while, I'll run into a scenario where maybe it doesn't click, and maybe neuromuscularly there may be some deficiencies in their core, which in that case we usually need to do some additional core exercises to wake up the maybe the transverse abs or whatever it may be. But this goes back to I can tell you guys we're kind of digging into what or diving into what I do for maybe my sessions. The first session, I can tell you what I do with every athlete. I do about a 5 or 10 minute assessment because I don't need to do more than that. As strength coaches, we're pretty good at seeing what's going on with an athlete just by watching them walk. Now, if I have them squat and maybe do a push up, a chest press, a row, a lunge, a hinge, that's really all I need to see. If I'm going to be working with them for a few weeks or a few months, every time we meet, every exercise they do, I should be assessing their form and figuring out what's going on. But anyways, the first thing I will do with every single person I meet with, whether it's an athlete or whether it's an 80-year-old geriatric individual, is we are going to go over what proper posture and alignment is. And we're going to spend some time dialing that in, whether that's 2 minutes or 10 minutes, however long that takes for them to understand that. Because once they know what that feels like, then they need to start practicing that throughout the day. I tell people, even who have sitting and desk jobs, hey, get up every hour or two, stand with perfect posture, get your head tall, pull your shoulders down and back, pull your
Earl
stomach
has
in.
bad posture right now.
Oh yeah. Okay, well, there you go.
That's because I'm a
But
desk
this is
jockey now.
yeah. But this is why this all goes back to just the fundamentals of human biomechanics. Like I'm not teaching people anything really weird. It's just, hey, perfect posture. Like perfect posture has been something that's been talked about for probably millennia, not just centuries or even decades. And this is nothing new. Like I'm just a big advocate of keeping perfect posture and alignment. And it just so happens from what I've seen, 90 degrees helps lock that in. And when you go past that, you start sacrificing posture. So, but yeah, that's the first thing I will go over with every single athlete, because if they can't do perfect posture, they can't do any exercise correctly. Every exercise will be off to varying degrees. So I got to have them locked in. They show me they have good posture. They show me they can pull their stomach in while keeping their head tall, shoulders retracted. Okay, let's try and do the same thing on a goblet squat. Let's try and do the same thing on a seated cable row. Let's try to do the same thing on a chest press. If they can do that, maybe next workout we'll do a Zercher squat. If they can do that, all right, let's put a little weight on a barbell squat, see if you can do that. If they can't, okay, we'll come back to this in a few workouts, or maybe we'll cue the core up and do a few more posture exercises to get their nervous system to understand what that proper posture is. Then we'll go back to the squat. So it's really simple. It's all about posture, alignment, and then letting them find their natural optimal stopping point while keeping those mechanics, which usually is around 90-degree positions.
I've got like one other question.
I got an audience question.
Oh,
Someone from
sweet. So let me butt in because
All right.
I wanna feel really special. Um, I have a question in regards to, like, you talked about the large group training. If I've got a shot putter that comes in with a wrestler that comes in with a field hockey player, are they all doing the same program, the same style, or are they gonna do like a different exercise layout? How would that work out how would that be set up in an actual training scenario?
It's a really good question. This actually goes back a little bit to the periodization topic. The exact exercise an athlete does, in my opinion, is a lot less important than how they're doing the exercise. The technique is the key. So at the end of the day, like pretty much most of my athletes at some point are going to be doing like, say, an incline dumbbell chest press. Why? Because it's just a staple that like we know is good for them. We know if their head is off the bench because they're sitting up a little bit, it's going to work on their posture. We know if they're tucking their elbows in, shoulders back, it's going to open up their chest. It's going to get their chest, shoulders, and triceps stronger. It's going to improve their shoulder stability. If they do it right, it's going to improve posture mechanics. And it's also going to transfer to barbell bench if they need that. It's going to transfer to blocking. It's going to transfer to throwing. So it's like, hey, if it's a field hockey player, if it's a tennis player, if it's a shot put athlete, or if it's an 80-year-old person, like everyone's going to benefit from doing a fundamental movement pattern correctly. Now, with that said, if it's maybe like I had an athlete come in the other day. He was a running back, pretty famous one. I'm not going to say who it was, but because he had a slight injury from just getting a separation. Somebody landed on his shoulder, but everyone else was doing barbell bench that day. He could have done barbell bench, but he would have had to go pretty light. So it's like, hey, this isn't even going to be that effective of a stimulus if we're having to use like 115 on incline bench when we know you can go two and a half times that. Let's do a bottoms up kettlebell chest press. So he did bottoms up kettlebell chest presses that day. Everybody else did incline barbell. So pretty simple. So usually maybe for injuries, or if it's maybe if it's say a soccer athlete that needs to focus a little bit more on lower body, we might have them do a variation, or maybe we might emphasize a few more different things. It's not, I would say 90% of the workout in the group setting is the same, and we'll adjust it accordingly. It gets tricky if you only have one or two guys like myself and maybe somebody else helping out, and we got 15 people there. There's only so much customization we can do, and that's one of the reasons we tell people, hey, you should, even if you do group training, you should periodically try and do a one-on-one session so we can kind of dive into some of those individual issues that you might have that are specific to your body. So,
All right, cool. This one's from Liquidarity. He said, can you give an example of a drastic transformation in athleticism from one of your athletes? So when they came in to when they left, or like from working with you, what happened?
yeah, I mean, I would say probably the biggest thing I see, and this happens with a lot of my athletes, is I for whatever reason, when I first started training athletes, specifically like pro athletes and college athletes, like 10 years ago, in terms of my own business, not at the college setting. One of the things I just created a niche for myself was working with athletes that had some type of injury they were overcoming, that maybe they hadn't found the results they needed to with traditional methods or with traditional physical therapy, or something that they were still struggling with, and it was something that was keeping them from being able to run at max speed, or to stay healthy, or maybe they are always struggling with joint pain. They were always getting injured and beat up. So I would say the biggest transformation that I honestly see with pretty much every athlete that comes to me, who has an injury issue, is that they end up being completely healthy with no pain, and that they're able to go back to full function just from doing the basic 90-degree eccentric isometrics. And honestly, that usually takes a lot less time than even what they thought was going to take. Sometimes within a matter of a few weeks, they're back to like, wow, like I've been trying to fix this for like 6 months. How come my shoulder was killing me whenever anybody would hit it, or I would try and do a barbell bench press, like it would set it off, it'd be sore for like a week later. All of a sudden we teach them how to get the proper position, proper mechanics for chest presses, for rows, proper technique using the 90-degree principle. All of a sudden, like the next day, my shoulder feels a little better. 3 days later, it's like, wow, pain's reduced 25, 30%. 2 weeks later, it's like, wow, my shoulder feels amazing. I can lift heavy again. Now I'm able to absorb force. Now when I'm on the field taking impact, it's not inflamed. Dude, I feel great. Thank you so much. Like, awesome. I didn't teach you anything fancy. I didn't like have you go do some weird corrective exercise or dry needle you. They've already tried that. It didn't work. All we did was teach them how to fire their muscles correctly, and that naturally brings healing and restoration of the body, because the human body is pretty good at being able to heal and repair itself, provided you give it the opportunity to.
Joel, I think I had a good time. You answered a lot of my questions. I wanted to see essentially how you laid out all of your training from that top down. Especially right off the bat with the periodization stuff, you answered all that stuff. I think that it's important that we all, move forward with an open mind. And I've enjoyed this discussion. I had a couple ideas for me moving forward training wise that I want to play around with our athletes here. So I do appreciate your time. Uh, where can people find you on social and your website?
Yeah, just my website is advancedhumanperformance.com. I've literally got hundreds of free articles up there. So when people think I'm just trying to push this stuff for the sake of getting them to buy my program, if that was the case, I never would have put up all the information that I use for my training methods for free on my website. Because really, most people don't need to buy anything. If they just go to my website, they can see enough for free that they don't need to ever purchase anything. And then on Instagram, I think Dr. Joel Seedman AHP. I'm on the usual, YouTube, TikTok, unfortunately, and Twitter. But yeah, no, just the usual. Just the usuals.
Thanks for being on the Garage Strength podcast, Joel. The
Yeah.
infamous Joel Seedman. Until next time, everybody. Peace.
Thanks for having me.